Individuation. Why falling apart might be the most important thing you ever do. What if the worst period of your life, the season where nothing made sense, where your identity felt like it was dissolving, where you looked in the mirror and genuinely did not recognize the person staring back, what if that was not a breakdown? What if that was the beginning of the most important psychological transformation a human being can go through? And what if the reason no one told you that is because most people never make it to the other side long enough to understand what was actually happening to them? Today, we are going to talk about a concept that the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung considered the central task of human life. He called it individuation, the process of becoming who you were always meant to be. Now, that phrase might sound like something you would find on a motivational poster, but what Jung actually described is far stranger, far more difficult, and far more relevant to your life than any self-help framework you have ever encountered. Because individuation does not begin with clarity. It begins with confusion. It does not start when you find yourself. It starts when you lose yourself. And the reason this matters to you, personally, right now, is that there is a very real chance this process is already underway in your life, and you have been misreading it as something going wrong. Over the next few minutes, we are going to walk through what individuation actually looks like, not as an abstract theory, but as a lived experience. We will talk about the mask you built to survive, the shadow you have been running from, the strange signals your psyche has been sending you, and the quiet, lifelong process of becoming not a better person, but a whole one. And by the end, I want to leave you with a single question, one that, if you sit with it honestly, might rearrange something inside you. Let us start at the surface, because that is where all of us begin. When you were very young, you learned something that every human being learns. You learned which version of yourself was welcomed and which version was not. Maybe you learned that being quiet earned you safety. Maybe you learned that being funny earned you love. Maybe you learned that achieving earned you the only form of attention available in your household. And so you built what Jung called the persona, from the Latin word for the masks worn by actors in ancient theater. The persona is not a lie, exactly. It is an adaptation. It is the version of you that learned how to navigate your family, your school, your culture, your world. And for a long time, it works. It works beautifully. The problem is not that you built a mask. The problem is that somewhere along the way, you forgot you were wearing one. You began to believe that the mask was your face, that the adapted self was the real self, that the role you played was the life you chose. Here is where it gets interesting. There comes a point, and if you are watching this video, there's a reasonable chance you have already reached it, where the persona stops working. Not because you did something wrong, but because you outgrew it. The life you built starts to feel hollow. The career that once gave you purpose now fills you with a restlessness you cannot name. Relationships that once felt solid begin to feel like performances. You wake up one morning, and the thought arrives, quiet and uninvited. Is this it? Jung saw this moment not as a failure. He saw it as a calling. He called it the crack in the persona, the point where the adapted self can no longer contain the fullness of who you actually are. And this is the threshold of individuation. Now, from the outside, this often looks like a crisis, a midlife unraveling, a period of depression or disorientation. People around you might say you are lost. But something very different might be happening. You are not falling apart. You are being called inward. Think of the person you know. Maybe it is you, who was always the responsible one, the good kid, the peacemaker who chose the sensible career and made everyone proud. And then, somewhere around 28 or 35 or 42, something shifted. A strange anger appeared, a resentment toward the very life they had worked so hard to build. Fantasies about quitting everything, and underneath it all, a guilt so heavy it was almost paralyzing. Guilt for even having these feelings. What is actually happening in that moment is that the parts of you that were never allowed to exist are beginning to push to the surface. The rebellious one, the creative one, the one who wants something that has no practical justification. These are not signs of selfishness or ingratitude. They are signs that the psyche is trying to become whole, and it cannot do that while half of you remains buried. Which brings us to what lies beneath the mask. Jung's name for it was the shadow, and it is one of the most misunderstood ideas in all of psychology. When most people hear the word shadow, they think of their dark side, their worst impulses, the things they are ashamed of. And yes, the shadow contains some of that. But here is what is almost never discussed. The shadow also contains gold. Your shadow is not just what you repressed because it was bad. It is everything you repressed because it did not fit. The vitality you were told was too much. The creativity that was not practical enough. The sensitivity that was labeled weakness. The ambition that felt dangerous. The parts of you that were too alive for the world you grew up in, those went into the shadow too. So when Jung talked about shadow work, he was not asking you to confront your inner monster. He was asking you to confront your unlived life. And there is a strangely reliable way to find it. Think of someone in your life who irritates you beyond reason. Not someone who has genuinely wronged you. That is different. I mean someone whose mere presence, whose personality, whose way of being in the world triggers an intensity of reaction in you that does not quite match what they are actually doing. They are too loud, too needy, too arrogant, too emotional, too free. And something about them gets under your skin in a way you cannot fully explain. Jung would say, pay very close attention to that reaction, because what you are experiencing is likely shadow projection. The quality that enrages you in another person is almost always a quality that lives somewhere in you, disowned, buried, unacknowledged. You are not reacting to them. You are reacting to a part of yourself that you exiled long ago and are now encountering in the mirror of another human being. This is not a comfortable realization. It is not meant to be. Individuation asks you to pull the projection back, not to become that quality, not to act it out, but to stop pretending it does not exist in you, to sit with the discomfort of knowing that you are larger and more contradictory than the version of yourself you have been presenting to the world. But the shadow is only one layer. There is another encounter on this path that Jung considered even more disorienting and more transformative. He called it the anima in men and the animus in women, though modern Jungian thinkers have expanded this well beyond a simple binary. At its core, this is the encounter with what Jung called the inner other, the qualities your psyche categorized as fundamentally not you. Not because they truly are not yours, but because your culture, your family, your conditioning taught you to disown them. For some people, this is the encounter with their own tenderness after a lifetime of performing strength. For others, it is the encounter with their own power after a lifetime of performing accommodation. It is the part of you that shows up most vividly in your closest relationships, in who you are drawn to, in who you fall in love with, in what you find both fascinating and frightening in another person. Jung believed that until you meet this inner figure consciously, you will keep projecting it onto the people around you. You will keep falling in love with your own missing pieces rather than integrating them. And you will keep wondering why your relationships feel like they are trying to teach you something you cannot quite name. They are trying to teach you about yourself. Now we arrive at what Jung considered the deepest layer of the psyche, and it requires a shift in how you think about who you are. For most of your life, you have probably operated under the assumption that you are your ego, your conscious mind, your decision-making self, the voice in your head that says I and means it. Jung did not disagree that the ego is real, but he believed it was not the center. It was more like a small lit room in a very large house, and the house itself, the totality of everything you are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, known and unknown, Jung called the self with a capital S. The self is not your identity. It is the organizing principle beneath your identity. It is what holds the opposites of your nature in tension without collapsing into one side or the other. And Jung believed it is this deeper self, not the ego, that is actually orchestrating the process of individuation. This is why the process often feels like being guided by something you do not fully understand. You find yourself drawn to a book that rearranges your thinking. A dream recurs. A house with rooms you have never entered, water rising, an animal that watches you from a distance. An image haunts you during the day. A sudden pull towards something, art, solitude, nature, silence, that does not fit your normal routine. These are not random. Jung believed they are compensatory messages from the unconscious. When your conscious life has become too one-sided, too rational, too controlled, too identified with a single role, the deeper psyche begins to send signals, not to confuse you, but to balance you, to remind you of everything you have been leaving out. Individuation begins in earnest when you stop dismissing these signals and start listening. But here is perhaps the most important thing to understand about this entire process, and it is the part that most people get wrong. Individuation does not have a finish line. There is no moment where you arrive at your true self and the work is done. Jung was emphatic about this. It is not a destination. It is a spiraling, lifelong relationship between the conscious and the unconscious. Each time you integrate something, a piece of the shadow, a quality you projected, a truth you avoided, the spiral deepens. New layers appear. New contradictions emerge. The process does not simplify you. It makes you more complex, more nuanced, more capable of holding paradox. And the goal, if we can even call it a goal, is not perfection. It is not enlightenment. It is not becoming some idealized version of yourself. The goal is wholeness. And wholeness, by definition, includes everything. Your strength and your fragility, your compassion and your selfishness, your light and the parts of you that still prefer the dark. Jung used a term for this, the transcendent function. Not transcendence as in escaping your humanity, but the capacity to hold two opposing truths about yourself at the same time without needing to resolve them. To be both confident and uncertain, both deeply connected and fundamentally alone. Both the person you show the world and the one who lives beneath. That is not a contradiction to be fixed. That is a life to be lived. So let me bring this back to you. Not as a theory, not as an intellectual exercise, but as something that may already be in motion in your life. If there has been a period in your life, maybe recently, maybe years ago, where the ground beneath you seemed to give way, where the identity you had constructed no longer fit, where you felt a sadness or a restlessness or a quiet desperation that you could not explain to the people around you, where you wondered if something was deeply wrong with you. Consider the possibility that nothing was wrong. Consider the possibility that something was finally, after years of waiting, going right. That the discomfort was not a sign of failure but of expansion, that the psyche, in its strange and patient wisdom, was dismantling a version of you that was too small to make room for one that could hold more. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But he also understood something that makes that phrase far more demanding than it sounds. Who you truly are includes everything you have spent your life running from, your darkness, your contradictions, the parts of you that do not make sense and never will. So the question is not really, who am I? You have been asking that one for years, and the answers keep shifting. The deeper question is this: what in you have you been refusing to meet, and what might change if you finally turn toward it? If this gave you something to sit with, something to think about in the quiet moments, I'm glad. This channel is a place for that kind of thinking, the kind that does not rush to conclusions, the kind that lets questions stay open a little longer than is comfortable. If you would like to continue this conversation, subscribing is the simplest way to make sure these videos find you again. And if someone in your life is going through a season that looks a lot like what we described today, maybe this is worth sharing with them. Thank you for your time. Take care of yourself.